In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and review linear equations and parallel and perpendicular lines. So we need to remember there are a couple different forms of a line. There's slope-intercept form. We have y equals mx plus b, where the m is going to be your slope, and then you have your b, which is your y-intercept in the equation. Then we have point-slope form, where we could just plug in the point and the slope. And we should also know the formula for slope, which is the change in y over the change in x. Parallel lines have the same slope. Perpendicular lines are the opposite reciprocal. So first one, write the equation of a line that goes through the following 2 points. I need to first of all calculate the slope. So I'm going to calculate the slope by doing change in y over the change in x. Now make sure I'm going to start with a -6. I have to go -6 minus a -4. Because I started with a -6 over here, I need to start with a -2. So I go -2 minus 1. Be very careful with the negatives. Now if you put this in your calculator, you need to put parentheses around the entire numerator. So we go -6 minus -4 is really like -6 plus 4, so that turns into -2 over -2 minus 1 is a -3. Now a negative divided by negative turns positive, so we end up with positive 2/3. That's my slope. Now I need to go through that specific point, either 1, -4, 2, -6. I would suggest in this case, go ahead and just use the point slope form of the equation of a line, which is located right there. So when I plug that into the equation of the line, I would just go y minus the y value. Now the y value is a -4, so I'm going to go y minus a -4 equals my slope, which is 2/3, multiplied by x minus 1. And when the double negative, I would get a positive, so y plus 4 is going to be equal to 2/3 times x minus 1. Now, that may be okay, but they may want it also in slope-intercept, so you might have to distribute here and rewrite it as y plus 4 equals 2/3 x minus 2/3, and we'd have to move the 4 over by subtracting that from both sides. So then you'd end up with 2/3 x and -2/3 minus 12/3 is going to be equal to -14/3. And that would be your equation of a line that goes through those 2 points. Now the next step is to go, that it's parallel. It's going to be parallel to this line through a different point. So if it's parallel, it has to have the same slope. So all we do is we start out with a slope of 2/3. Now we're going to use the point slope form again, and we're going to say it's y minus 0 equals 2/3 times x minus 1. So my final equation would just be 2/3 x minus 2/3. That's if it's parallel, because I just distributed the 2/3 in this case. The next example now is asking me to do a line that's going to be perpendicular. So perpendicular is going to have to be opposite reciprocal. So remember, the slope originally was 2/3. So if I'm going to do a slope that's perpendicular, I have to flip it and do the opposite sign. So I make a -3/2. And now it has to go through this point again. Using the point slope form, I go y minus 0 is -3/2 multiplied by x minus 1. I can then distribute the -3/2 to get -3/2 x plus 3/2. And that would be the equation of a line that's perpendicular to example 1, but through the point 1, 0 instead. Okay, let's look at a couple examples then of parallel and perpendicular lines. It says, which of the following lines is parallel to the line that goes through the 2 points that are given? Well, what does it mean if it's parallel? It's got to have same slope. So right away we know that if we can just calculate the slope, we'll probably be able to identify pretty quickly which one it is. And in fact, they're all different slopes. That's all we need to do. So when I calculate my slope, again, I'm going to do the change in the y's. So I'm going to take 5 minus a negative 1 divided by the change in the x's. Now make sure, since I started with 5 again, I must start with the negative 2. So it's negative 2 minus 1. So that would get me 6 divided by negative 3, which turns into negative 2. It's the same slope, so the only line that has a slope of negative 2 is A. So A is my answer for this example. Then I go ahead and I look at the next one. The next one says that I want write an equation where a line is perpendicular to the line formed by y equals negative 1/4 x minus 5. So if my original equation was negative 1/4 x minus 5, I could say that the slope is negative 1/4. Now if I'm perpendicular, remember I got to do the opposite reciprocal. So I flip it and make it positive. So it's positive 4 over 1